Please be seated. All the lessons today speak something of either distrust or fear or enmity. If we look in particular at the letter of James, we see some very pointed statements. It's a very fierce section of this letter, and actually the people who decide what we read in church, the people who put together the lectionary, the series of readings, have left out two even fiercer sections, one in the middle of what we read and one after it. So I commend those to you in the future. Take a look at what James actually says, because he makes a real contrast between what he calls the wisdom of this world and the wisdom from above. And he does a pretty good job right there without the sections that are even fiercer. And what he says is that we human beings tend to look around at each other and we decide that we want something that someone else has. We operate on the assumption that we need what somebody else has. We want to be successful, which means that we have to be better than other people. We tend to look at other people and at ourselves as being in competition at the least and as being enemies at the most. And what he says is that those competition, those feelings of competition, the actions of I've got to be better than you, lead to conflict. They lead to looking at each other as enemies. They lead to serious disagreements because we're paying attention only to what is going on in the world and we're not paying attention to what God is calling us to do. One of the things I read in a commentary is this, that it says, church can be one of the few places where people hear, where we hear, that our envy and ambition can be exposed for what it really is. It's earthly, unspiritual, devilish, as well as for what it really does, our envy and ambition and competition. It creates disputes and conflicts, causing war within people and between them. Wisdom from above focuses on the needs of others and not on its own self-establishment. I'm going to go to the gospel and come back to James in a little while. So in the gospel, Jesus and his disciples are passing through Galilee. They have already experienced the transfiguration. They are on their, and before the transfiguration, Jesus said in the beautiful, lush, pagan area of Caesarea Philippi, we read about it a couple weeks ago, Jesus says to his disciples, he asks his disciples, who do those people out there say that I am? And they came up with a list, Elijah, another prophet, somebody else. And Jesus then asked, who do you say that I am? And Peter said, you are the Christ, the Messiah. And Jesus goes on to tell him that the Son of Man, he's calling himself that, is going to be arrested and killed, and 3 days later rise again. And do you remember what Peter says? He says, God forbid. And Jesus takes him aside, and then what Peter is doing is rebuking. He's scolding Jesus. No, that's not going to happen. And Jesus takes him aside and he says, get behind me, Satan. Do not say that what I've just told you is going to happen isn't going to happen. So then they have the transfiguration where Peter and John and James see Jesus all glowing on the mountaintop. They come down from the mountaintop and they're headed for Jerusalem. And that's what's going on here. The transfiguration happens in chapter 9 and we're still in chapter 9. So they're passing through Galilee, and Jesus is focusing his teaching on the disciples. He's not teaching big crowds, although there are more than just the 12 with him. So they're walking along, and he says to them, the Son of Man, I am going to be killed, and then I'll be dead, and then I'll rise again after 3 days. This time, nobody says anything to him. They don't understand what he's talking about, but they are afraid to tell him that. You know, Peter already got his head bitten off before, so they're not about to try that again. So they're going on their way, and they get to Capernaum, and that's kind of Jesus's headquarters. And Jesus asks them, what were you discussing on the way? What were you arguing about on the way? And they're again afraid to tell him, because what they're arguing about, after having been part of the transfiguration experience, some of them, and after having Jesus tell them 2 different times that he's going to be killed and then rise again 3 days later, they don't really want to admit that what they're arguing about is who's on first. Which one of them is the most important disciple? Which one of them is the best follower of Jesus? They don't want to tell him that. And you can kind of imagine why they wouldn't want to tell him that. But clearly he knows what they've been talking about, because he calls the 12 over to him in this house, probably Peter's house, and sits down and says, whoever's going to be the greatest needs to be the least. That's how we do things as my disciples. And then he takes a child, and he's holding the child on his lap or in front of him, and he says, if you receive a child, if you receive someone like this, then you are receiving me. You're welcoming me into your life. And if you're welcoming me, you're welcoming the one who sent me. Well, you noticed, I think you did, because I saw people kind of do this when I was reading the gospel, and it says a child it. Well, in Greek, there's more than one word for child, but the 2 main ones that are used are both what they're called neuter nouns. That means they have neither male nor female. There's no gender assigned in the language, the Greek language, for child. And you can discuss why that is, but that's a function of the language. But at the time of Jesus, whether you happen to be Greek-speaking, Hebrew-speaking, Aramaic-speaking, any other language, children were less important than the least of the servants of the household, the least of the people who were maybe washing the floors or sweeping up the garbage. A child was less than that. So another way of thinking about that, the word it, the pronoun it would be effective. And there's the particular word for child being used in this passage is a word that really means servant, or is also used for the least important servant in the building, in the place. So Jesus takes a nameless child. We don't know whether that child is a little boy or a little girl. We don't know anything about that child except that it has been given the description of the very least, lower than the servant, the least servant. And Jesus takes that child and he holds that child and he says, you need to welcome this child. You need to welcome people like that. You need to welcome people who are invisible and completely unimportant. And when you do that, you're welcoming me. And when you do that, you're welcoming the one who sent me. So instead of arguing about who's the most important among you, you need to be looking for who's the least important anywhere around you and go welcome, include, care for that unimportant, invisible, unnecessary person or group of people. That's what he's telling them. And they really are not very happy about that. And he is not very happy with them at this point because, as I said, he's already told them twice. He's asked them who he is. Peter has told him the truth. He recognizes Jesus as the Christ, the Messiah, but nobody likes the way what the Messiah says is going to happen next. And that's because their worldview, it's very much the same. The culture has already taught them it's the same as the religious authorities. It's the same as other religious members of the Jewish people. And that the expectation of a Messiah was that the Messiah would come, that there would be instantaneous beauty in the earth, that the Romans would be made to leave, that everything would be beautiful and visible, and that the Messiah would reverse all of the things that were bad and terrible. So for the person that they've already figured out as the Messiah to say, oh no, I'm going to be tortured and killed, is more than they can take. It means they have to rethink everything about who they are and who everybody else is. And they don't find that very easy to do. And frankly, we don't either. Let's go back to James for a minute. This is being written, the person we assume wrote this letter is James of Jerusalem. That's James, Jesus' brother. So he is writing this letter and he is saying, stop fighting with each other in the Christian community. Stop fighting in your house church. Stop fighting on the street. Stop having these disagreements. Because if you're operating out of envy, if you're operating out of competition, if you're operating out of the commerce of the day, the culture of the day, then what that leads to is enmity. It leads to dissension. It leads to hurting each other. And it leads to eventually looking at each other not only as somebody you dislike, but somebody who has an opinion different from yours, and that makes that person the enemy. It's like we don't have this issue in the church, thank God, but it would be like those of you sitting on this side, which is the gospel side of the church, because the pulpit is over here. And those of you sitting on the epistle side, which is the less important side of the church, would be, talking to each other like, you people over here, the choir, and the three of you on this side, would be looking at those people over there and thinking, well, they don't know the right place to sit. And you would be thinking, well, they're being high and mighty, and we don't like them. And you could, and there have been places where a discussion about what the best seats in the house are. You've heard that also in the Gospels. There can be the discussion of, well, my opinion is this. I have this opinion about communion. I have this opinion about religion in general. I have this opinion about the Episcopal Church being the best church in the world. James says those opinions lead to disaster. And we can apply this now to the way in which we treat each other, not in here, I hope, but outside of here, and the way we tend to think about other people and the way we react. I said at 8 o'clock that, you have a choice. If someone cuts you off in traffic, you could say a prayer for them, or you can swear at them in your car. And I said that I tend to be the person who makes that second choice. That is not a good thing. I have objectified that other person. I'm considering that person to be, less than I am, and certainly less important because I have a mission I'm on, and that person interrupted it. We need to stop thinking about each other instantaneously as the other, as wrong. We need to stop searching for blame and searching instead for ways we can work together. So those are the points that are being made both in the gospel and in the letter of James. And let me read you a couple things from commentaries. And one of the things it talked about, one of these commentaries talked about, you bring this up in church and people might be uncomfortable, but church can be one of the few places where people, we, can hear that our envy and ambition can be exposed for what they really are, earthly, unspiritual, devilish, as well as for what they really do, which is create disputes and conflicts, causing war between people and within them. Wisdom from above focuses on the needs of others and not on its own self-establishment, not on its own ego. James of Jerusalem, the brother of the Lord, did not build his argument in this letter on the mystery of his brother's death and resurrection. He didn't put it into a pie in the sky kind of thing. Look, he died, he's resurrected, everything's wonderful. He built it on the elemental faith in God that allowed Jesus to live and die the way he did. In the brother of James, in Jesus, wisdom from above met wisdom from below so that everyone could see which was which. In him, God's word became flesh indeed, and that is why his disciples have so much trouble understanding him, accepting what he has to say, and they're his friends. It's no wonder nobody else has can have an easy time doing that. So the question then comes for us. As disciples of Jesus, are we not, in some ways, also afraid to engage Jesus' radical messianic teaching? He's not saying the world is going to be perfect because I'm here. He's saying that welcome, that radical welcome, you have to go out and find people who aren't like you and accept them whether you want to or not. Not just accept them, welcome them. And are we not also afraid to admit to him the posturing and power struggles that we have among one another as his disciples? I'm not seeing those here, and I really better not. But we do see those outside this building, and we see them among denominations, among Christian denominations. I already said, we like to think the Episcopal Church is the best church. Well, that's not how we should be thinking. And we should not be thinking that we have a corner on the religious belief in God. We need to recognize that there are other people who believe in God, and that they are not the enemy just because they don't believe the same way we do. We need to remember that our job is to do what Jesus says, which is welcome the least important, the most despised, the person we can't even pay, that we don't even see because they're so unimportant. And in welcoming that person and those groups of people, then we are also welcoming Jesus. And in welcoming Jesus, we're welcoming God. It's easier to curse at the person who cuts in front of me than it is for me to pray for that person. But that's not how it should be. And James makes that very clear. And Jesus makes that very clear as well. Amen.